Hello, welcome to the Overcome and Become podcast. I'm James Kennington, your host with Better Me Nation. Today, I'm really excited. I've got a great guest, Sharon Costanzo with the Keep Talking Revolution. We are doing the part two of a two-part series on relationships, and Sharon is a relationship coach specializing in high conflict relationships. And so we're going to be talking about how to open up dialogue in those types of relationships and what that means to us. Now, the reason we are talking about relationships on a podcast about health and nutrition is because relationships are a very integrative part of our health. Relationships is what consider a primary food. It's something that we feed our souls, not just the food we put in our bodies, but there's also a lot of other things we feed ourselves. And our relationship health is essential for our happiness and well-being, because when relationships aren't great, and Sharon will talk to this, a lot of other things suffer as well. Our stress goes up, and when our body's stressed, we start having chronic illness or inflammation. We react to food poorly. We don't sleep well. So relationships is essential to our wellness, our health, and our happiness. So I'm very excited Sharon is with us. Sharon, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
Why don't you tell our listeners a little bit more about yourself and what I shared with them?
Yeah. So I love how you talked about overcoming high conflict relationships. That's definitely like the world that I came from. So just to give you a little bit of my background, I have two engineering degrees. So I grew up and I think the reason why I did that, the reason why I got two engineering degrees is because I grew up in a culture where I could see that women were often playing this more submissive and supportive role to men in our culture. And I knew I didn't want that. And so I think part of me subconsciously was like, well, if I can prove that I can do anything that a man can do and I can achieve as much academically and professionally as them, then maybe I will be respected the same way as men are respected within our society. I really think that was part of my subconscious belief. And then I became kind of this I don't even think I've ever told anyone this on a podcast before, but I was just reminded of it because of a coach that I've been working with recently. When I was a freshman in college, one of my friends gave me the nickname of brute force
Wow. Okay.
because I was like, nobody's gonna walk on me, nobody's gonna tell me what to do. I I had this very kind of I don't take any crap from anybody kind of exterior, but it was really more in my superficial relationships. I didn't really know how to set healthy boundaries in my personal relationships. I really struggled with that. So I felt like a doormat often. And then when I had kind of gotten fed up with how things were, then I would kind of explode in that way. So, and I think a lot of people relate to that. Like, I just can't take it anymore and I don't have a really positive and productive way to get past that, to create that more collaborative relationship, which is what I think we all want. But a lot of us just don't have the tools and skills that we need to do that. So that was happening for me professionally in the work environment where I was working with a lot of men. And then that was happening for me at home as well in my marriage. And I
Yeah.
think it's
Oh, sorry.
no, go
I
ahead.
think a lot of people do resonate with that, whether they're people pleasers or passive aggressive or just don't want to rock the boat and just avoid conflict altogether. But eventually, like it's all rooted in feeling. Like that feeling has to have space somewhere, and it's like a volcano if you don't give it some space, right?
Right, right. Yeah, and I still remember, I was probably like 13 years old. I remember hearing in church that anger was bad. And I was a really conscientious person, so I was like, okay, I'm just never gonna get angry. And that turned out like, I agree with the premise of that to a point, but it turned into a space in my life where I wasn't really free to express some of the emotions that I was feeling. I wasn't free to express my frustration, or if somebody did something that hurt my feelings, I didn't have a way of saying, "Hey, that really hurt my feelings. Can we talk about it? Can we figure out maybe a different way for us to be in relationship so that we don't keep repeating this hurtful behavior?"
Right. I think a lot of us come to relationships with narratives that begin when we're young, especially like in a setting where maybe it's school or like what you mentioned, church, where the audience has a vast range of experience or upbringing or perspective. And so maybe that person talking about anger is bad was saying in his mindset and his experience was like belittling your children and your wife is bad,
Yeah.
right? And you were
Right.
thinking, and that my sister, because I want to play this game instead of that game, is bad. That's what you heard. Maybe that's what you heard, or something like that, right? And so,
Yeah. Well, we hear things, especially as kids, we hear things with such a black and white perspective, and we need to kind of figure out a way to navigate into more nuance sometimes, and that doesn't always naturally happen.
right. And I especially think, like, even though we're adults, navigating out of that is really hard. Even though you may be consciously aware, like, I'm dealing with this, and you know that it's like, this is stupid, but I can't escape it either. I was talking with my sister. She's got a friend who's got a really weird relationship with their parents, and they're aware that it exists, but they can't escape that mindset. It's difficult for them.
It is difficult. It's just like, you talk about when you talk about trauma, for example, and how our neural pathways kind of get set. That happens in our relationships too. These patterns get set in our relationships. Our family members, especially, they're used to us being a certain way. And when we try and kind of shift out of that dynamic, there's like this natural gravitational pull back to that. I don't know if you've ever noticed that with your siblings or your parents. You've like grown in so many ways in your career and even with your wife and kids, and you go back home for Thanksgiving or something and you're like that old person again. You just
Oh
feel
yeah,
pulled back into that.
oh yeah. I feel like every time I'm around my aunts and uncles, I'm like 12 years old again, and it's like like you have a nephew who's almost 50, right? And they're like, I know, but yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's also interesting, like in that evolution too, how siblings will treat each other because I've got two sons that are married. And I remember when me and my siblings were all like going to college and then starting to get married and stuff, that spouse now adds a new dynamic to the relationship. And they married that person because they love them and they love how they are complimented by that person, right? But now that
Mhm.
means my brother's a little bit different, right? Or my
Oh,
sister's
yeah.
different. And so now I'm seeing that with my kids. And I remember there's a time where like my sister and my sister-in-law, like some things happened and it was like bad, like voodoo going on in the family, right? And so I'm like, okay, how do I keep my sons and new spouses from kind of going down this path where they can stay great friends? Because our family's really close and tight, but I
Mhm.
don't want like I want whom they marry to add to our family, not take away from, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. That's such an interesting dynamic. And I think one thing that happens often is we don't realize how dysfunctional our own family is until we get married and we see a totally different way of doing things. And some of it we like, and some of it maybe we don't like. Like my husband's family has a totally different script for how they interact with each other than my family does. And it's really helpful to kind of set aside your judgment for a minute and just get kind of curious, like, I wonder how this came about, and what parts of this do we like, what parts of this do we want to be different for our family, how can we be understanding and compassionate about these different rules, and make sure that all the family members kind of feel seen and valued for what they have to bring to the table.
That's so big. And I think this is manifest in so many different ways and situations too. And we'll dive into this. I just kind of want to bring up like another situation. Like I was talking with this lady, she grew up in one religion, and as an adult, she joined another one. And she still loves um, the doctrines and teachings of her current church, but she misses the culture of her previous one, and she feels very isolated within her husband's family because they can't understand why she wants something different culturally, right?
Mm. Oh,
And
yeah. It's
so
all
she's at
culture.
church but feels alone, right? She's where she wants to be doctrinally but alone culturally.
Oh, yeah. I love that. That's such a great thing to kind of think about and explore. Just what do our different cultures mean, and what do they bring to us, and what values are there in our culture? Some cultures really value community, and some cultures
Right.
really value independence, and yeah, there's so much richness in all of that.
So let's kind of jump into this a little bit, right? Because I think we could probably identify hundreds of different scenarios that our listeners or people watching may feel, right?
Mhm. Oh, yeah.
Let's kind of talk about the principles behind this. So what are some characteristics of a high conflict relationship? And we know some are like short tempered with each other, right? Like short fuses, right?
Right.
But
Right.
outside of the obvious, what are some things that people can look for?
I think maybe the way I would frame it is maybe relationships where conflict is kind of an unhealthy part of the relationship,
Okay.
because because I think a lot of us, the way we envision it is the constant fighting is like a high conflict relationship. But I think also a really characteristic of an unhealthy dynamic with conflict is kind of avoiding any hot button issues. We can't
Right.
talk about religion or money or politics or anything like that with people we're close to, because we don't want to disrupt this delicate balance. So there's like that feeling of walking on eggshells, or there's this feeling that like being different is a threat rather than something that's kind of, oh, I'm really curious about that. And so having a difference is a threat. Or maybe there's this idea that there's a right way to do something. A lot of couples,
Yeah.
especially when they get into the parenting of teenagers, there's a lot of conflict, and it might not be like drag out fights about things, but there's this real discomfort about how do we want to parent our kids. And I might have a more authoritarian style, and my spouse might want to be a little bit more of a big warm hug, or more permissive, or whatever else, and that feels like a big threat in the relationship. And how do we navigate that? um so yeah, feeling like one person needs to be right, or you use the word passive aggressive. How do we get our way if we don't feel like we can really talk about it directly and negotiate? And um yeah, those are a few of the things that I think of when I think of conflict being a problem in a relationship, rather than just something that we accept and embrace.
What about when one partner is able to accept the conflict and the other one doesn't?
That's such a great point. So, like, I think one of the key characteristics of that is the one partner saying, "Hey, we have different points of view. That's okay. That doesn't make me a bad person. That doesn't make you a bad person." And the other person's like, "No, there's absolutely a right way to do this, and I think mine is it, and I'm going to dig in my heels until we get the point across." And that can be a really difficult situation, especially when the stakes are really high. And I think the person who is more open minded and more willing to kind of negotiate and collaborate, they have a big job on their hands. For sure. And I think the very first skill, and this is the first thing that I teach in my program, the very first skill is to look for some sort of shared value or shared vision within the relationship. Because there is going to be one, at least,
Right.
rather than who's right or wrong with this parenting issue that we have. Is it better to be more permissive or is it better to be more strict? Take a step back and say, what is our goal as parents? What is the number one thing that I want to make sure my kids have when they leave my care? And chances are that you're going to find some overlap in your values in that area, regardless of whether or not you agree on how to achieve the goal. Because a lot of times we argue over strategy. We're not arguing about what our intention is, we're
Right.
arguing about how to get there. So if we can step back and talk about what is our intention, my husband and I, for example, we don't practice the same religion. So we've had to navigate that with religion. Our kids are still young, so we haven't gotten to the really hard part of parenting where they're in second and third grade right now, where parenting I think is fairly easy. We're not dealing with teenager
Right.
level problems yet. But if you can take a step back and be like, okay, as parents, what do we really want to make sure our kids leave with? And agree on that, or talk about that, talk about our values, talk about our dreams, talk about maybe some of the unfortunate experiences that we have as kids that we want to avoid with our kids and why those dreams are so important. Then it makes it so much easier to talk about the strategy and be flexible on what can we do to accomplish that goal. And maybe even, why are our different points of view such great complements of each other in making sure that our kids get that really well-rounded experience that they need? Because they don't need two parents that are exactly the same.
Right.
They need two parents that complement each other and offer them different things.
In fact, I think kids like the differences
Yeah.
because it helps explain them internally. Like
Oh.
we feel like I didn't grow up around my extended family, right? And so, but when I
Mhm.
moved back to Utah, I was around uncles. I was like, oh, that's why I'm the way I am. And I think parents are the same way. If parents are homogenous in their styles and their everything, kids don't really have a chance to explore who they are either.
Oh, that's such a beautiful point. Like, I know with my kids, like, my husband is the fun dad,
We
and
all guys are
I'm
the fun guys, right? It's how we survive.
yeah. Yeah, so my husband's the fun dad, and they do crazy things with him that they know that I don't do. And then when they want that more comfort, that more emotional presence, then that's where I come in. And if I resented my husband for being the fun dad, I wouldn't have a chance to really settle into my role as a parent. And I'm not saying this is a gendered thing at all. Like,
Right.
every single couple is totally different in how
Mhm.
they navigate all of this, but just seeing the beauty of our differences and appreciating that rather than seeing it as a threat makes such a huge difference.
So this is interesting you bring this up because I feel like you brought this up in your introduction, and I think it's come up a couple different times in a different way, right? In that we all have different energies about us, right?
Mhm.
So, like the engineering mindset, and I'm not going to be walked over, is very much a masculine energy, right? Masculine,
Oh, for
for
sure.
those listening, masculine and feminine energy is not the same as male and female, right? They're often
Mhm.
identified, and I know you know, so I'm just saying this for listeners. They're often
Right.
identified that way because of stereotypes, and for the most part, it is kind of lined up. But like in my marriage, I think my wife probably has some masculine energies that I don't have. She's a lot more tenacious and a lot more like upfront with people. Like she's
Mhm.
great at sales, and I'm like, I don't want to like inconvenience people, right?
Yeah.
And I'm much more like, but she's also very intuitive, and so that's part of her feminine energy, is that right? And I've got
Mhm.
feminine energies and other masculine, but I think in this, what we're talking about here, like with dads and moms and the comfort and the kids going for comfort, I think our energies play a role in these conflicts too, right?
Oh, for
I think
sure.
understanding like James, like Catherine says, okay, James is dominant feminine energy most of the time, even though he's got these very strong masculine energy traits, right? And me recognizing Catherine is very strong with masculine energy here. How does this play into our conflict, right? And so, how do you help people navigate that and figure that stuff out without being
Yeah.
it's sounding like weird, like voodoo, weird, like because I don't know people hear like energy and think, oh, this weird Eastern medicine,
Oh, yeah.
healing, like tarot card reading stuff, right? And it's not that. It's
Yeah.
not that at all.
Well, no, and I love that you bring this up because I think this is something that comes up a lot, especially in the coaching sphere, and you have a lot of female coaches that are very woo, they're very
Yeah,
much into their feminine energy. And then you've got somebody like Tony Robbins or something that's very rigid and structured and all of
yeah,
those things. And I tend to fall somewhere in between, and I think I bring that kind of engineering mindset that's very structured and very strategic and all of those things, but then just that intuitive side of things as well. And I think like I mentioned before, one of the great examples is the intention and the strategy. The intention is that very feminine energy, and the strategy is the very masculine. And I think if you try and put the strategy ahead of the intention, then you get conflict because you're fighting over how to do things instead of why we're doing things. But you need both. You need both an intention and then a way to implement that intention. So you can't just be all in that feminine energy, and you can't just be all in that masculine energy. Another example is that I use in my program a lot is, okay, once we've started implementing our plan, then we have to step back and be flexible about it. So we start to implement and test and try, and then we have to be like, oh, this isn't quite working the way that I wanted to. What am I learning from it? Let's say, for example, you try a certain approach, you try and bring something up a certain way with your husband, and you're just sure that you figured out the right way to do it, and it just totally falls apart in front of you. Like, oh,
yeah,
he didn't receive that the way I intended. So I'm going to go back to the drawing board, and I'm going to be creative, which is creativity is kind of
mm,
a feminine energy.
right.
I'm going to be creative, but also strategic. So it really is a great, like being in a relationship with anyone, male or female, or any other way that people present themselves in the relationship. It really does require us. I love what Terry Real says about this so often is being a whole person within the relationship rather than, the old way of doing things, which was very polarized, very role and rule based. Like, he's going to bring home the bacon and she's going to serve it.
Yeah,
I think as we evolve as a people, and as we renegotiate some of these roles, there is a great opportunity in all of this, but it does require us to bring a little bit more of our creativity and intention to the table than we did before.
absolutely. I learned this lesson last night. so this episode might is very timely. Uh, so this may be I may be getting like free coaching accidentally, but
No, I love
so
it.
our family life has changed a lot in the last, I'm going to say, year, right?
Mhm.
In that, like, my career has changed, my wife's business direction has changed. We've had some other family things going on, and um, I think the expectations that Kat and I have had for each other has shifted, right? Without talking to each other,
Mm.
right? And so it's creating uncomfortable moments. Like last night, I totally dropped the ball on something, right? Like she's told me a million times that she would really like it if I did this, right? And I'm like, okay, like I did it upstairs, right?
Yeah.
But then um, when I get into the flow of my day, I just don't think about because I'm very segmented in how I run my day, and I think a lot
Mhm.
of guys are very segment, like they kind of like we're like a bento box, right? And so until I get into this next stage, I'm not thinking about okay, what do I do? So like part of like the argument obviously had nothing to do with like work. It was about our personal lives, right? So I'm not thinking
Mhm.
about our personal life till I'm done with work. But
Yeah.
my wife is not a bento box,
Yeah.
right? She's like Thanksgiving dinner. And so she's like, hey, are we going to have this when I get home? And I'm like, what are you talking about? Right. But I work from home. And so it's like in her mind, she's thinking, how haven't you thought about this? You're
Mm.
there. I'm not.
Yeah.
How come this isn't happening? And I'm like, because when I check out, that's when I think about it. But then it's too late for me to do anything meaningful. Right.
Mm.
And so I'm kind of like stressing, like, okay, I really got to kiss up today. Because it's not like she hasn't
Yeah.
told me. She's told me. I've
Right.
heard it.
Right. But it sounds like you didn't hear it in the way of like, okay, I hear it. And now how do I have to arrange my day so that I can actually do it?
Right. Yeah.
And I'm like you too in a lot of ways. Like I like to have I get in the flow of my work. I like to be uninterrupted while I'm working. I hear all of these mom entrepreneurs talking about running a business while they're taking care of the kids, and it just gives me anxiety. I'm like,
Yeah.
I've always been a working mom with childcare because that just helps me to be more present as a mom and as a business owner or as an employee. There's value in both of those things. And I think the thing that you pointed out was so important is, we need to talk about the expectation, and then what are the agreements? What are the actual agreements or commitments that we need to make in order to make whatever that thing is that needs to be done happen?
I love that idea of agreements because I think that's something that we could do really well because there's a few conversation topics that either she doesn't like or I don't like. Right.
Mm.
And there's also like timing. Like, I don't know why, but like, and maybe I'm wrong, but maybe I just noticed this, but I feel like she brings up the high emotion ones more towards the end of the day. And maybe it's because
Oh,
it's been marinating and I'm exhausted. And
yeah.
so it's not that I'm like, I don't want to talk about it. I just don't want to talk about it when all like my brain is so fatigued that I can't like,
Mhm.
I just don't care in that moment anymore. I'm like, no, I just want to like not think.
Yeah.
And she's like, no, I've been primed all day for this. Let's do this.
Right.
Now it's like, oh, you're always walking away from this.
Mhm.
And then when I'm like, okay, hey, let's talk about it, she's like, no, I need time to warm up to it, right? And I'm like,
Ah,
why? Why? Why do you need time to warm up? Like, let's just talk about it, right?
right.
And I think that's an agreement we could have is like, hey, I want to. We need to talk about our finances, or we need to talk about like housekeeping responsibilities, whether it be making food or cleaning or laundry, whatever it
Mhm.
is. How long do you need to prepare for this? And Kat, like, James, when's a good time? You know what I mean? Like,
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, and I
and
think that's a great
I'd rather do it over food because I can be an emotional eater, and that would help me like
uh,
not be like I can let the emotions go into like an omelet instead of out my mouth, right? Like,
there you go. I love that. Yeah, and I think it's great to think about that, like, what do we each need? What do our energies look like throughout the day and throughout the week? When are we both most likely to be in the position where we can have a productive conversation rather than the way most of us do it, which is wait till something's really upsetting us and then blow up, and not in like an angry way, but just do that emotional release
Yeah.
that doesn't really help us to address whatever issue it is that's been building up over time.
So what are some mindsets? I think we've kind of talked about them indirectly, but what are some of the mindsets that couples can start to adopt? Because like, even though like my wife and I, and I'm just going to use this as like a representation of everybody, right? Even
Yeah.
though we have, and I think everybody has high conflict is a stressing point, right? There's something that creates high conflict, right? That's not,
Mm-hmm.
nobody doesn't have that, right? We have a great marriage, right? So the fact that like high conflict is a tension point for us doesn't mean that like, oh, are we talking separate? It doesn't mean any of that, right?
Right.
Um, so what are some mindsets that couples or even business partners or whoever, right, can
Mm-hmm.
adopt to help um, start having more productive conversations about difficult things or situations?
Yeah, I think one of them is the win-win mindset. And I know that this is like a really familiar term for most of us. Stephen Covey talks about it in the Seven Habits.
Right.
And but it really, I think actually implementing it and actually believing that if we can collaborate, there might even be a better solution than the solution that I'm thinking of right now that I'm trying
Yeah.
to enforce upon my partner. That really is a lot harder to actually do than it is to just, oh, this is a great idea. Think win-win. But once you've practiced it a few times and you've actually seen it in action, then it really is that like mindset of a win-win. If I win and my spouse doesn't feel like they're winning, then it's really a lose-lose because it hurts the relationship that we're trying to create. So
Yeah.
that's a really big one.
He talks about relationships, I think, in that part of the book too, where he was having dinner with someone and the guy was saying, like, we're just not on the same page. And then he's like, well, how many kids do you have? Right. And he's like, I've got three. He's like, so 1 + 1 = 5. And he's like, what do you mean? He's like, you value the differences. Right. And yeah, that's it. That's a good mindset. So win-win. What's
Yeah,
another mindset?
another one that has been a huge game changer for me. I did not grow up in a family like this, and nobody who knows me would be surprised just because I have this like very strong, direct approach. Is the concept of a generous interpretation or a charitable interpretation, which is to assume that people are showing up, assume the best of people and their intentions.
Talk more about that. I think
So,
it's fascinating because I've heard that before.
yeah,
Not the same way. Like had a boss say the this is a long time ago. She was like the number one cause for bad breakups is unmet expectations. So don't
yeah,
assume like that bad intentions.
right,
This is the
right.
second, but you're only the second person who's ever kind of brought that up. So tell me more
Yeah,
about
so like for example, one of the things my husband and I had conflict over for a very long time was household chores. I've worked full time for most of our marriage. We've been married for 11 years. But in the home, we both grew up with much more traditional upbringings. Most of us did not grow up with parents who both worked full time and then
right.
they came home and shared family responsibilities equally. So my husband, he was socialized as a man, and he thought that when he got home from work that his job was done and anything he did at home was extra. And
Yeah.
I was really pissed off about that for a long time until I was like, wait a minute. This isn't like him intentionally trying to be lazy. This is just the model of what a man does that was given to him.
Yeah.
And until we have some like more explicit conversations, and they go a lot better when I don't assume that he's being lazy, which is what I was doing for a long time. When I can just drop my judgment and be curious of like, oh, how did he get to a place in his life where this is what he thought was normal? And he really did think that he was giving, the best contribution that he could, and assume that from the beginning. And then, okay, well, we do need to renegotiate this. I'm not okay with it, but I'm not going to assume that his intention is to take advantage of me.
Yeah. I think a good thing in this example is when you do that and that's set. I think you brought up like his parents and upbringing. So my parents were very similar, right? Like I remember my mom saying, "Oh, I've got to have dinner so Alan's happy when he gets home," right? And it's like,
Mhm.
well, that's not what makes dad. I'm sure it makes him happy, but that's not like I don't think my dad ever really expected that because his mom always
Yeah.
worked, right? But my mom had that. But what happens in our marriage? My mom would say to me, "Well, is Kat any good at cleaning? Because you know her mom, right?" My mom had so much judgment because of I don't even know why, to be honest, right? But like, but my mom would try to transpose her ideas of what a healthy marriage was onto me. And I've seen
Mhm.
some people take that into their marriage, and so like, oh well, my mom or my dad says that this is how it should be. So I'm gonna like what you said earlier. So I'm right and you're wrong, right?
Mhm.
How do we now reverse that and say turn around and say no, mom, you are wrong because we define our marriage this way. I appreciate that you defined your marriage that way with you and dad, but
Mhm.
we are defining our marriage this way.
Yeah, and I think that is that's a such a big problem for a lot of people in their marriage, is like creating that kind of sacred space of we get to decide how we do our marriage
Yeah.
and how our parents feel about it. We do kind of have to like cut the apron strings a little bit and decide like it doesn't really matter what my parents think about how we do marriage. It's not my job to please them anymore.
Yeah.
My job is to look at my spouse and again go back to that intention of what are we trying to create here together, and whose voices really matter in this conversation. Like we can honor our parents and love them for everything that they gave to us and be grateful to them for all of the gifts they gave us, and let go of the need to please them by how we do our marriage.
So I'm going to ask this question on behalf. This is not me. Like sometimes people
Okay.
say asking for a friend, and they're really asking for a friend.
Yeah.
This time I'm
Yeah.
really asking for a friend. Okay. Um,
Uh-huh.
so a friend, I won't say male or female. Their spouse is not doing what you just said to do, right? And over 20, 25 years, it's kind of boiled up into this part where the one spouse is there anything personal like in the marriage like well they own a rental property like a vacation property, and this person's spouse now is taking over that rental property in a very nice resort town like half the time without paying for it because I don't
Mm.
want to upset my parents. And the other spouse is
Mm.
like, but like the whole tourist season is now wasted. We're now paying for all their vacations. How
Mhm.
does that person set a boundary to the other spouse saying it's time to, like you say, cut the apron strings and take care of us first, even after 20 years? And this person, they said, their spouse said, I know, but I know that you'll forgive me easier than they'll forgive me. Because at one point, this person's dad didn't talk to them for like 5 years. And they got the silent
Yeah.
treatment for disappointing, right? And so
Oh.
they're so how do you like say it's time to put us first?
Yeah, well, I think that phrase is very good. It's time to put us first. Like I totally understand and I have a lot of compassion for you and the fear that you have about disappointing your parents. However, I wonder if you really understand the impact that it has on our relationship when you continually put them ahead. Like, really talk about the impact rather than the intent, but the impact. Like, I understand, or I think I understand. Am I right? This is the what I'm seeing. I'm seeing your fear with your parents really overriding your decision making, and your fear is totally valid because your parents have shown you in the past that they won't talk to you if you don't give them what they want.
Right.
Is that a legacy that you really want to pass on to the next generation?
Yeah.
And have that serious conversation, like, this is what I see happening, this is what's going to happen if we don't put a this is what I think is going to happen if we don't put a stop to this. Is this really what you want to pass on to the kids? That is a huge motivator for a lot of us. Like, we don't want to pass on those generational patterns to our kids. And
Yeah.
you can't set a rule for your spouse. You can't make them do what you want them to do, but you can have a really honest heart to heart conversation of, this is what I see happening if things don't change. Is that really what you want your legacy to be?
I love that so much because you said earlier we don't realize how dysfunctional our family is until we get married and move out. And if you can kind of like flip that, say, do you want this dysfunction to continue down to our children and then to our grandchildren? Or where do you want
Mm.
that to stop? Do you want it to stop here or there? Would you wish it had stopped a generation ahead of us so you weren't
Yeah.
dealing with this? Wow, that's really,
Yeah. It's really hard work, but I think that is a lot of times, if we can't do it for each other as spouses, we can find the strength to do it for our kids.
yeah. And the courage to have that conversation is probably the hardest part.
Yeah, and I would say in that case, if it's been going on for that long, get some help.
Yeah. Yeah.
Get a coach or a therapist who has some of those skills and perspectives to help you find the words to say what you need to say, or the words or the perspective or the mindset, whatever it is that you need. If you really are motivated and don't want to don't want to pass that dysfunction on to the next
Right.
generation, get some help.
Yeah. And their kids are older now. They're kind of realizing, like, when they were young, they thought, oh, this is healthy. But now that they're older, like, wow, this is whack. Like, this is craziness. Right.
Yeah, and I think it's really never too late. I think sometimes we think that we've gotten too far, think too much has happened. But I mean, just as an example, my grandfather passed away at 77, and this was maybe about 20 years ago. And he was a dysfunctional force in our family. And a lot has changed since that happened. A lot of healing has happened in our family, even though he lived till he was 77 years old. So it is never too late to start healing the dysfunctional in your family.
Wow. I love that. I'm going to quote that. It's never too late. All right. Cool. I'm going to come back to this moment. 43 minutes. All right. um, so now we've got some mindsets. What are some maybe tools or that people can kind of like acquire so that way when unexpected conflict comes up? Because sometimes, like I said, my wife and I, we were doing really good till no, we're still doing good, but like with everything being turned upside on its head, like everything changing, our routines and everything has changed, right? So what are some
Yeah.
tools we can adopt so that way we're not okay, we got to figure this out again, right?
Mhm. I think a great one for a lot of couples is what Gottman calls the State of the Union.
Uh-huh.
And you can do it once a month, you can do it every week, you can do it every other week, where you just kind of talk about how things are going. And it can be short, but I'm sure if you Google Gottman State of the Union, you'll find the framework. I also have it if anybody wants to send me a message, and I'll send it to you. But the very first thing you do in your State of the Union meeting with your spouse is talk about what's going well. because you don't want to just have a complaint fest nobody's
Right.
going to look forward to that. But what are we doing well that we want to keep doing? And then you can talk about, well, what are some things that we can work on to improve? And you want to, take turns being the speaker and the listener and really hearing each other out. And then just like, what's one thing that we can focus on this week? And the other question that's really awesome, that's really helpful, is what's one thing I can do for you to make you feel loved this week?
Oh, I love that.
And then it's like, if my spouse does that one thing that I asked them to do, then I know that they're paying attention and they're
Yeah.
making an effort to make me feel loved. And it doesn't have to be this whole, smorgasbord of things. If you can just kind of simplify it and show effort in small ways on a regular basis, that kind of helps to kind of put all that, all that investment into your bank account, so that when the crap does hit the fan, you're not running on empty.
Yeah. I've never done one of those before. I'm gonna try that. I think that's the one. We're going on a cruise next week, and I
Mm.
think when we're laying on some beach chairs in the middle of the ocean, I think I'm going to say, let's do a little
Well,
State of the Union, right?
that's a great time when you're laying on the beach to be like, what are we doing awesome? What can we
Yeah,
celebrate about what we did to get ourselves here?
yeah, yeah. I
Because we
also
don't
think
do that enough. We don't celebrate all those small things often enough.
right, and last week, she came to me with like the coolest compliment. Like it made my day, and I probably didn't show it, right? But she's like, "You make this look easy." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" Right? Like it was like a really like I really felt like seen and heard, or just
Mm.
I felt appreciated in that moment, right? Even though
Oh.
I don't know why she said it because I don't know, but it was awesome. But it kind of if that State of the Union started like that, I my stress levels are going to drop significantly, right?
Mhm.
Anytime someone expresses love or gratitude towards you, like our defense mechanisms go down, right? And I
Mhm.
think like even though I've never done this, like I think a lot of the skills I've learned in like my coaching classes and in my coaching, I know that effective ways that couples can do this is one, practice being present in the moment, whether it be like when I'm on a walk, maybe do a guided meditation. So instead of letting
Mhm.
my mind wander like here and there, listen to a guided meditation where I learn to be present on a specific topic. Because I think sometimes we listen with the intent to be heard, not listen with the intent to understand. To quote Dr. Covey
Mhm.
again, right? That's another
Right.
Coveyism. Right?
Yep.
So I think that's one thing, right? Like if we're listening with the intent to understand versus to be understood, we're not thinking, how do I respond? How do I react? What do I want them to know? What do I want? And then we don't even hear a word they say, right? So if we
Oh,
can
for
practice
sure.
being present, that's one way that we can always like have that a great conversation. And this also
Mhm.
reminds me, like companies every year do a SWOT analysis, right? So SWOT is SWOT for those who don't know. It's strength, weakness, opportunity, threat. And so it kind of reminds me of that.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. That's like a SWOT analysis for your marriage.
A lot more emotional.
Oh, yeah, marriage is an emotional investment, isn't it?
Yeah. So how do we? So we do all this stuff, and we're making progress. We're getting better at this, but inevitably, whenever you push yourself and you're doing new things, you're gonna fail. You're gonna
Mhm.
experience setbacks. How do we navigate? How do couples navigate that successfully? The failure side of it, when you're
I
trying
think
so hard and you're putting all this great effort, and then it's like, oh, it kind of blew up.
right. I think it's one of the things I love about the work that Kristen Neff has done with self-compassion is just embracing that shared humanity. And I think sometimes in our marriage, it's such a high stakes relationship that instead of really getting vulnerable with our humanity, we kind of have a mask on or a wall up because we don't want that person that we care about, that can hurt us more than anyone else to see that. So I think really appreciating the shared humanity of all of it and being willing to fail and own up to your failures and expecting that it's going to be messy and uncomfortable and painful at times. Just that mindset of accepting that that's part of the deal is really helpful.
I love that. When you said the mask, it reminded me of masks that I know I wear and that I assume my wife wears, right? But it would be
Mhm.
interesting, I think, for us to kind of to ask each other, like, what does, when this goes wrong, what does that look like to you? Like, like, when you imagine this going sideways, what do you see happening, right? Whether
Mm.
it be like
Yeah.
between us or between you or, because I would say things and she might say things. Like for me, the mask that I wear is rejection, right?
Mm.
So like my mom had a lot of like conditions and guilt tripping when I was growing up, right? And then unintentionally, my dad just wasn't able to fulfill on promises. Not that he didn't want to, but just life change. And as an adult, I look back, and go, okay, that's what it was. But it doesn't change that
Mhm.
I felt the rejection, right? So I will wear a
Oh,
mask
yeah.
to protect from being rejected. And I'm
Mhm.
assuming that Catherine wears a mask to not looking capable enough, right?
Mm.
I could be so wrong. For everybody who knows my wife, just know that I'm probably wrong on that assumption.
You're making a guess, but that's a good like, it's good to reflect on that. And I think the other skill, like kind of accepting and embracing that shared humanity is really helpful. The other skill that I think we don't talk about often enough is the skill of repair.
Oh
And
wow.
it's a lot deeper than just an apology. It's kind of acknowledging where did this rupture happen and what does it take to get back into connection and trust with this person. And if we can do that well, then we can mess up a lot
Right.
because we always get back to a good place. Like one of the things that Gottman said, and this was such a great insight and research for me, was we can mess up with our kids. I think it was like you only have to get it right like 30% of the time if you know how to repair when you get it wrong. And I think that's the same with our spouses, if we're willing to show up more authentically and be in the mess of getting it wrong, we're going to have a lot more trusting of a relationship than if we keep those masks on and try and keep the peace by walking on eggshells or try and overpower and get into these power struggles, try and be right. If we can accept that this disharmony is part of the deal and learn how to really repair and understand each other better and commit to try again, then we can mess up a lot.
Yeah. That my dad, when I was after I graduated from high school, I was still wearing a retainer because I wore like braces all through high school, and I'm now living like 3 or 4 states away, middle of the country, and like my retainer breaks or something, probably from doing something stupid. Maybe I stepped on it or I don't know.
Mhm.
My dad loses it, right? He just loses it. And then the
Yeah.
next day he calls me, and for the first time that I ever remembered, my dad said, "James, I'm really sorry.
Mhm.
I know that wasn't your fault. I'm really sorry in how I responded to you. I, I was more mad at the situation than I was at you, but I didn't make it, but I know I made it feel like it was your fault." And
Mm.
and in that moment, I felt more important to my dad than my surroundings were to him or than other things were to him. And I've never forgotten that. In that moment, I felt like I was more important than anything else.
Mhm.
And I think from that I took that it's okay to apologize. Like I've apologized to my kids a lot because my dad was willing to do that to me. I don't know that I would have if I didn't have that example from my dad.
Oh, that's so beautiful. Like to be able to really experience what that meaningful repair and apology feels like,
Yeah,
is so powerful.
yeah. But like I said, I'm getting a little like this is emotionally kind of deep for me here too. But I hope
Yeah.
people listening to this are feeling the same, and I hope they're reflecting on this. We've covered a lot of ground here. I just kind of want to give a plug for coaching or therapy in this moment because I know there's a lot of relationships out there where people either don't have the emotional bandwidth or the emotional maturity to start or the awareness on how to heal. And so, can you just kind of like, there may be some people like, oh, I know somebody and it's not you, right? Or maybe they don't know anybody and now they're going to, I need to call Sharon or whatever. Or maybe
Mhm.
it's deeper, right? Where they need to work through a lot of childhood trauma with a therapist. But can you
Yeah.
kind of speak to people who are beyond doing this on their own, why the coaching or therapy matters? Because I think a lot of people are afraid of
Oh,
becoming
yeah.
comfortable in a coaching or therapy situation.
Yeah, well, I mean, and the fear is valid. Like, it's a very vulnerable space to
Yeah,
be working with a coach or a therapist, especially on something as intimate as your marriage. And I think, like, you wanna make sure that you're in a trusting relationship with the coach or therapist that you work with. I've done a lot of coaching and therapy over the years. One of the things I share is my husband and I have seen 6 or 7 couples therapists in our 11 years of marriage. So, I've been relentless about,
right.
like,
Yeah,
I don't want to get 40 years down the road and feel like there's nothing left for us. That's kind of been one of my big visions, but it has been painful and uncomfortable at times, and there have been coaches and therapists that I haven't really felt like have handled our situation very well, but I do believe that if your intention is to grow and improve, that you will find the right help. And there's something about working with somebody who's a little bit less emotionally invested in your stuff that they can help to just offer a different perspective and open your mind to different possibilities that you may not have ever considered. And help you to see maybe, like for me, I'm a very like skills practical based coach. So help you to see where the gaps are in your mindset or your skills and really work on that in a way that's comfortable. Working with a coach should be kind of like working with a personal trainer. Like they should push you hard enough that you are getting stronger, but not so hard that you're, ending up at the doctor's office because you injured yourself.
right.
And so when I work out, I don't do well when I'm at home on my own. I do well with a plan, with some outside support, with some accountability, and that's what a coach can really be for you. And every coach kind of has their different skill set and emphasis, but a therapist might be able to dig a little bit more deeply into the past and help fill in some of those gaps where that the emotion is just overwhelming and regulating your emotions is really difficult. And like I said, everybody kind of has their own skill set. But if you're feeling stuck and it's something you've struggled with for a while, like 6 months to a year or more, then getting some outside help, I think, is really the best thing to do. It's the
Absolutely.
best way to kind of care for yourself and to invest in something that's really gonna make a long-term difference in your life.
I agree. And having just someone there to help you stay the course because we live in this whirlwind life, right? Like this is happening. And the things that we're not accountable to always fall at the bottom of the list.
Mhm. Yep.
And our marriage should not fall to the, or any valuable relationship, whether it be a business partnership or simply, it should never fall to the bottom. Because at the end of the day, the relationships are where we find is where our happiness and joy is manifested, right?
Oh, for sure.
It's
Yep.
not in being alone on a boat. It's not being alone on a trip to Paris. It's not being on alone skydiving, right? It's the people we're with, you know.
Mhm.
Hey, Sharon, thanks so much for being with me today. Is there anything else that you want to share with people that you think that if there's one thing that people can do today, right now, to elevate their communication in a relationship, what would be the one thing that anybody could do right now to elevate it?
I think the thing that I say so often, and I think it applies particularly to anybody who'd be listening to this podcast because we're personal development people,
Yeah.
is don't be afraid to get it wrong. You know, we can get so perfectionistic in our relationships that we lose that realness and that humanity. So don't be afraid to get it wrong and just be okay with admitting, oh, I slipped up there. Let me try again.
That's excellent advice. I love it. Well, thanks again for being with us. I sure appreciate your time. And I just want to encourage any listeners, if you want to get a coach, call Sharon, right? And so she'll be great with your relationships and help you navigate this. And so thanks again, Sharon. And we will see you guys next time on the podcast.
Thank you so much.